This is Health Yeah, your weekly update on what's going on in the health, wellness, and medical world with Monica Robbins.
With summer just around the corner and temperatures already heating up, health experts are warning everyone to protect themselves from skin cancer. Melanoma is the most invasive skin cancer with the highest risk of death.
It was about a lesion about the size of a dime, and it looked bad.
And while it's a serious skin cancer, it's highly curable if caught early. And now a new study explores the role genetics play in this dangerous form of skin cancer. Plus, the ABCs of melanoma and what you need to look out for. And we're debunking some widely circulated myths surrounding the disease.
Well, the danger comes from lack of knowledge.
It's all straight ahead on this week's Prescription for Life. Hello and welcome to Prescription for Life. I'm Monica Robbins. According to the American Association for Cancer Research, more than 5 million people receive a skin cancer diagnosis every year. And while melanoma only makes up 2% of cases, it accounts for the most skin cancer deaths. We have an expert here from Cleveland Clinic to talk about the role genetics play. But first, a family affected by melanoma and their mission to educate people about loving the skin you're in. Here's Isabel Lawrence with that story.
Yeah. There's Halloween.
Yeah.
At their family home in North Canton.
She was always a cheerleader, and her brother was always a football player.
Well, there she's an old lady bunny.
Don and Susie Deidemeyer and Ryan Gray flip through memories. Ellen, the woman they all loved, smiling back at them.
Oh, there she is skiing.
Yeah. Peek and peek.
Yeah, peek and peek.
The years that have passed reflected in these aging pages.
I'm getting you a new album.
I have them, Ryan. I have lots of them.
Snapshots of happier times with a woman who this family called their son.
It's the memories that's hard.
In 2007, at just 29 years old, Ellen passed away after a battle with melanoma, a serious form of skin cancer that spread throughout her body.
Oh, it was a shock. It was a shock. We always thought that she would get better.
Young and vibrant, her parents, Susie and Don, remember Ellen grew up playing tennis, always surrounded by friends, volunteering and engaged in the community.
You're invincible at that point in time, and I think that's what everybody thinks.
So when she asked her husband, Ryan, to check out something she felt on her head towards the end of 2006, she probably didn't think much of it.
Well, I was sitting right where you're sitting, and she said, would you look at it? I said, sure. And I stood up behind her, and I was horrified immediately. It was about a lesion about the size of a dime, and it looked bad.
A trip to the doctor revealed it was melanoma, the most invasive type of skin cancer.
We learned that melanoma doesn't grow as other skin cancer. Melanoma, as the plastic surgeon explained, it starts flat and then its tentacles go into and through the layers of skin into your bloodstream. And it just progressed to a little bit too far by the time they found it.
Concerningly, it appeared the melanoma had been there for about a year already, the family jumping into action.
She was very, very brave, and she never complained. She wanted people to know about it. So that just makes her unbelievable to me.
Tragically, Ellen passed away about a year after she was diagnosed and 3 days after her birthday. Throughout her battle, Ellen was dedicated to sharing her story, hoping to spare others what she went through.
She immediately started thinking about how she can affect other people through her experience.
The family formed Ellen's Effort, hosting fundraisers to support the North Canton Medical Foundation, raising money for wigs, gas cards, and other resources for cancer patients. The art Ellen made throughout her treatment, helping support the fund.
I feel it was Ellen's wish to do this, and that's why it's important to carry this on. Even though sometimes it's a little bit hard, difficult, it's very important, and I want to honor her wish.
With a focus on education and prevention, the family began Love Your Skin Stark County in 2018, providing sunblock to local pools and summer camps and conducting skin checks at Kent State's Stark campus.
We're just trying to make especially younger generations aware that that is a risk. You are taking a risk by tanning, by not using sunscreen, by not covering your skin, but also that, and that's kind of where the Love Your Skin comes in, loving your skin as it is.
The warmth and rays of light Ellen brought to so many, now helping others protect themselves from the real dangers of the sun.
Well, for me, it's selfish reasons. I want her to be proud. For the rest of us, it's so we don't lose sight of who she was. We want to make sure that we are doing justice to her name.
Now to our expert and his study on how inherited genes play a role in being diagnosed with melanoma. Joining me now is Dr. Joshua Arbesman, a dermatologist with Cleveland Clinic. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So we're looking at melanoma in a whole new light because of a study you have done, and kind of explain the genetic factor of this, because I thought melanoma was only related basically to the sun.
Yeah, so a lot of focus for a long time has been understandably on exposure to ultraviolet radiation in the form of sun exposure or tanning bed exposure, and that definitely plays a role. But I think what we wanted to explore is most diseases are multifactorial, and melanoma is no different. And what we wanted to look a little bit more about is why certain people are genetically predisposed to melanoma. We know that melanoma lifetime risk in the United States is about 1 in 50, or 2% of the population will get a melanoma over their lifetime. But yet, a lot of people have gotten a lot of sun. And so the question becomes are there other factors that we can explore? What makes you in that 1 in 50 risk factor?
So what is the, genetic factor that you discovered? I mean, is it higher?
Yeah, so for a long time, people thought inherited predisposition to melanoma is something that runs in your genes and runs in your family, was maybe about 2 to 2.5% of patients that had a melanoma. But going back, I'm just going to go back a number of years, there was a study that looked at rates of cancer in twins. They looked at how often, if one twin had a cancer, did the other twin get a cancer? And they looked at a large amount of twins, and they compared the rates in identical and fraternal twins. Identical twins theoretically have essentially the same genetic material as each other, versus fraternal twins are like siblings. And what they looked at is they wanted to see how often one was in the other. One cancer would be in the other twin. And they found that actually melanoma came out as the most heritable cancer amongst all the cancers that they studied, above traditionally associated cancers such as breast, ovarian, and colon cancer, which we know run in families as well, and melanoma also runs in families. And so looking at that as the most heritable cancer, we wanted to understand a little bit more about this. And when I say we, the study that we did was a close collaboration with my colleague, Dr. Pauline Funchain, who also used to be at the Cleveland Clinic. She's now at Stanford University. And what we did is we formed, with generous support from the Gross family, and we're very appreciative for that, the Gross Family Melanoma Registry, to understand more about these genetic risk factors. And what we looked for was trying to understand not just some of the genes that have been known to be associated with melanoma, but looking at genes that may have been associated with cancer predisposition in general. So we've enrolled actually close to 600 patients into this registry. The study that we just published was the first 400 patients that we analyzed. And when I say sort of these genes that we're looking for, we looked at about 80 or so genes known to be related to cancer predisposition. And we found that 15% of the patients that we studied in this study had what we call a pathogenic germline variant. What that means is that they have a change in their genetic material in one of those genes that disrupts the function of that gene and increases their risk for cancer because of that disrupted function. And so we saw that 15%, about 1 in 7 of our patients had essentially cancer predisposition within melanoma. And I mentioned 2 to 2.5% previously thought. That's about 7-fold increase rate. It wasn't one particular gene that we discovered, but it was a cohort of genes that we found that increased your risk for cancer. And surprisingly, 2/3 of those genes were not previously associated with melanoma as well. So it's sort of a new cadre of genes that may be relevant to melanoma risk as well.
Were all the genes the same though in all of the patients, or were they different?
So each patient may have had a different change in a different gene. So it was sort of this cohort of genes, this 80 or so genes that we tested. Probably about 15 to 20 of those had some participant that had a genetic change that was significant in one of those genes. So genes that we found that were altered in some of the patients that people know. We found patients that had alterations in BRCA1 and 2, the BRCA genes, which increase your risk for breast, ovarian, and other types of cancers. And so these genetic changes that we found are also significant for that risk for other cancers and do change the patient's lives in terms of screening, prophylactic treatment, potentially to reduce the risk of developing those cancers.
So I'm glad you brought up screening. What did we learn from this? And is 400 even enough to change the parameters of screening?
Yeah, so two aspects to that question. One thing that I want to mention, I appreciate you bringing it up, we also looked at 3 other larger data sets to see, was this a Cleveland Clinic specific phenomenon? We wanted to make sure that this was more generalizable to the general population that has melanoma. And we found about the same rate, somewhere between 10 and 15% of the patients in each of those 3 additional studies had, again, a pathogenic germline variant in one of those genes. Sometimes different genes than we had found, but sort of combined, it speaks to the fact that this is a conserved phenomenon that occurs across a lot of patients. When we talk about genetic testing, sort of screening, I'll talk about screening in general as well, but screening for inherited predisposition to some sort of genetic condition. In the genetics literature, we want to have a sort of pre-test probability. What are the odds, not knowing anything, that this test would be positive? We want it to be about 5%. So 1 in 20 people that would get tested with this test would have a positive result. And so that's sort of the benchmark that we want to cross in terms of genetic testing. We definitely crossed it with that 10 or 15%, indicating that if we expanded the criteria for testing within melanoma, which usually was very strict in the past, both strict in terms of who got tested, but also strict in terms of which genes were tested. If we expanded those based upon our data, we would potentially capture more patients and affect their lives. In terms of screening, there's 2 aspects of screening that we get out of this. One is sometimes people were found to have a genetic risk for other cancers, and so screening for those cancers early and at the right frequency based upon guidelines can save those patients' lives. But also there are prophylactic treatments that people can pursue, whether it be prophylactic mastectomy or oophorectomy removal of the ovaries that can reduce patients' risk for those cancers. And then there's screening within melanoma, where patients should get screened by their dermatologist to look for skin cancer at a regular rate. And if you have a genetic predisposition, for sure you should also go to the dermatologist to get checked to make sure that we're catching melanoma and other skin cancers early. And we know that when we catch melanoma early, it is much more treatable than if we catch it later.
Let's talk real world though. Not everybody has the ability to get genetically tested. Yeah. You know, and typically it's you have such a strong family history, that's when you go get genetically tested. So is that the parameter you're saying? That's the case where maybe we open it up and we look for melanoma in those particular tests?
Yeah, so previously, and a lot of this is, you know, sort of set by guidelines, but also then those guidelines set what the insurance companies cover in terms of what you're talking about. And obviously genetic testing, thankfully, has come down in price from a few $1,000s to potentially a few $100s. So it is more achievable, but still can be quite costly. Currently, the guidelines are what we call rule of 3. 3 melanomas in a family, 3 melanomas in an individual, which are pretty strict criteria to meet then to get genetic testing that an insurance company will typically cover. What we did within our study was expanding it more to a rule of two. 2 melanomas in a family, 2 melanomas in an individual, or another cancer. So looking within the patients that have had melanoma, this is not uncommon, but we're sort of taking a stepwise approach. We don't want to move too quickly to expand those criteria because we may end up testing too many people, and we don't want to always do tests that are unnecessary. And so I think real world practicality from this is, one is dermatologists and oncologists that take care of patients with melanoma should probably ask more about family history so that we know who may meet those criteria. And we also hope the guidelines will shift such that the insurance companies will cover for that genetic testing going forward.
So just based on what we know right now, if somebody has a family member, a mother, a father, whomever, who has melanoma, should they take this a little more seriously, that they could potentially be at risk?
Yeah, so two things come out of that. I think one is, if someone has a first-degree relative, father, mother, sibling, or even child that has had melanoma, they should go to the dermatologist to get screened on at least once-a-year basis. And we've known this for a long time and recommended this for a long time, which probably underscores that we know there's a genetic risk factor there as well. So that's point one. And then the second thing is maybe thinking about the person who has had melanoma should explore the possibility of genetic testing. If they test positive in one of these genes, then it potentially triggers the relative to get tested as well.
And the other thing for the person who has melanoma is they should consider this because they may be at risk for other cancers.
Exactly. And so them knowing about their genetic risk so there's two things actually that come out of it. One is the risk for other cancers, but what we've also found is that sometimes having a change in one of these genes may actually affect treatment if they were to develop another cancer. We had an individual within our study that he got tested and was found to have a genetic alteration in a particular gene, and he ended up going to develop, unfortunately, pancreatic cancer, but this affected the treatment that he got based upon the genetics that they knew. And so some genetic changes that we inherit actually make us more susceptible or have better outcomes when we get treated with some of these newer therapies that have come out within the cancer world.
So knowing your genes may help personalize your medicine.
Exactly.
Wow. Still ahead, the ABCs of melanoma and the myths surrounding the disease and people of color. We've been talking about the role genes play in the risk of melanoma. Let's go back into the conversation with our expert from Cleveland Clinic. But bottom line, you're a dermatologist. What do you want people to know about melanoma?
So obviously, I'm obligated to tell people to protect themselves from the sun. I think that's quite important. But I also think looking over your skin to see if you notice something of significance is equally important. Coming to the dermatologist early to know whether or not something on your skin is skin cancer or melanoma specific can be life-saving. As we talked about, catching a melanoma early makes it much more likely to be treatable than catching it later. So things that we talk about are what we call the ABCDEs of melanoma. And these are signs to look for on something that may look like a mole, but may be of significance. And I'll just go through sort of the ABCDEs. A is for asymmetry, one half not matching the other, sort of a mole that looks different in that way. B is for border. Instead of a nice round border that many of our moles have, it's more of a jagged border. C is for color. Instead of one color, maybe tan or brown, the mole may be multiple colors: pink, tan, brown, dark brown, or very dark. Some melanomas just sort of look almost black. D is for diameter, which I often say is sort of a weaker sign. We talk about greater than the size of a pencil eraser, or 6 millimeters. If a mole is larger than that, we start to get concerned. That being said, some moles that are larger than that may have been there forever and are fine. And also, as you can imagine, a melanoma has to start out smaller to get to that point. So just because something isn't that size doesn't mean it can't be concerning. But I think the most critical thing for people to look out for is the E, the evolving sign. Cancer by very nature is growing and changing, and melanoma is no exception. So if you notice something that looks like a mole that is changing or looking different over time, or looks different than the rest of your moles, we call it the ugly duckling sign. That's something to come in for to get checked.
Great advice, great insight, and I look forward to seeing more what happens with your study.
Thank you.
All right, doctor, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
When it comes to melanoma and people of color, they are up to 4 times more likely to be diagnosed with advanced melanoma and 1.5 times more likely to die from the disease. William Pitts blows up the myths about people of color and skin cancer.
The women of New Home Baptist Church have a mission.
And we hand them out.
It's a flyer about skin cancer for a population they say typically doesn't worry about it.
The biggest myth is that people of color do not sunburn, and they do not get skin cancer.
But they do, and it can be worse than people with light skin.
Well, the danger comes from lack of knowledge. People normally ignore those signs of their skin that looks like there's a problem.
That's where Lauren White comes in. She created the flyer to remind people of color that they're not immune to skin cancer.
But the reality is that everyone is at risk of skin cancer, and it's often found much later in people of color, which makes it even more dangerous and outcomes much worse.
Because for people with fair skin, Dylan Miller with the U of A Skin Cancer Center says skin cancer is very survivable.
In 5 years, there's a 9% chance that takes your life, so pretty low. If you're Black or African American in the United States and you get diagnosed with melanoma, in 5 years, there's about a 34% chance that takes your life.
The flyer has 3 main parts: avoid the sun, cover up from the sun, and examine your skin every month for signs of skin cancer.
I think it's going to really resonate with the communities that New Home Baptist Church is outreaching to.
It would have resonated with Kelly Palmer. She never worried about the sun either.
Yeah, it's hot, but I'm fine. And so once I was diagnosed with skin cancer, I was like, wow, I really need to be more vigilant about protecting my skin.
The darkest skin has a 13.3 of SPF. So my skin complexion, I may only have 10 or less of natural SPF, which is not enough because everyone needs a minimum of 30.
Apart from education, they also need visibility. They want these flyers to go far and wide.
Our goal is for each one to teach one. So for each person to get that flyer, as we've taught them the information, we would love for them to get the information out to their loved ones.
William Pitts, 12 News.
That'll do it for this week's edition of Prescription for Life. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back here next week with another dose. Until then, I'm Monica Robbins, wishing you and yours good health.
Thank you so much for tuning into Health Yeah. Please find me on Twitter and Instagram at Monica Robbins. Like and follow my Facebook page, Monica Robbins WKYC. Find video podcasts at Monica Robbins channel on YouTube. And please subscribe. Wishing you great health and hope to see you again soon.
Thanks for listening to Health Yeah with Monica Robbins from WKYC Studios. Subscribe now so you never miss an update. And find more on everything you heard here on WKYC.com and on the WKYC app.